Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Jake Lilien. I am a fair housing attorney here in Washington, D.C. I am a bit of an outsider today because I do not live in Massachusetts and I am not from Massachusetts. I'm originally from New Jersey and I have been living and working in D.C. for a long time. But I nonetheless would like to give a shout out to Western Mass. Hopefully we have some Western Mass representation. I went to UMass Amherst for undergrad, and I was active in local politics in Hampshire County. So I know Western Mass doesn't always get the recognition it deserves. Somebody's here from Northampton, fantastic. So I'm here to talk about appraisal bias. At my nonprofit, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, or NCRC for short, we believe very strongly in promoting fair housing and fair lending and doing everything we can to try to eliminate the racial wealth gap. And one of the ways that we promote fair lending and fair housing is by doing fair housing testing around the country. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with fair housing testing, but for anyone who is not, let me just give you an example of what a typical fair housing test might look like. A fair housing group like ours might hire a Black person and a white person to go to the same apartment complex on the same day at different times. And we would instruct both of them to say that they're interested in a one-bedroom apartment. And then they would report back to us how they got treated. And if some sort of egregious overt discrimination happened, like let's say the leasing agent told the Black tester, we don't rent to Black people here. If something like that happened, we would immediately file a complaint against the apartment complex, probably with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They regularly take testing complaints like that. But that kind of overt discrimination is pretty rare nowadays. What would be more likely to happen would be maybe that the white tester would be told, oh yeah, we have 5 units available. And the Black tester might be told, oh, sorry, we don't have anything. Or alternately, maybe the Black tester would be told, yes, we have 1 unit opening up on the 25th. Thank you, have a nice day. Whereas the white tester would be told, yeah, we have a unit opening up on the 25th, so let me give you a tour of it, and let me tell you about this special we're running, and I'll give you a brochure and my business card. And then, a couple of days later, the tester will get a phone call asking, are you still interested? We're still running that special. If that kind of thing happens, if there's a significant difference in treatment, then what we would probably do is retest, send in a different Black tester and white tester, see if the same thing happens. And if a business like an apartment complex is showing a pattern of discrimination, then we would file a complaint against them. And that kind of testing happens all the time. Lots of groups around the country are doing it. And the most common targets are apartment complexes, real estate companies like real estate agents, and also mortgage lenders. Those are very common forms of testing. But I decided a couple of years ago that I would like to open up our testing program to include appraisals. And that wasn't something that had really been done before. So I ended up doing some appraisal testing and writing a report on it, which was released in October and has gotten some attention. But before I get into what happened with my report, let me get into the history of appraisal bias in this country and give you an idea of why I thought it was necessary to start testing appraisers. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see some PowerPoint slides. If you don't, please let me know. If they're not advancing, someone can say, Jake, that didn't work, and I will appreciate it. So I'm going to start back in the 1930s. We just heard all about how reprehensible the FDR administration was in the way they handled redlining. But they didn't just pioneer redlining, they also made a name for themselves in the realm of appraisal bias too. The FDR administration was very progressive in certain ways, but not in others, especially when it comes to race. In the 1930s, FDR's administration decided that whenever the government needs to determine the value of a property, one of the factors that they should consider is the racial demographics of the neighborhood in which the property is located. And so they assign certain values to certain groups, to certain ethnic groups. They were very specific about it. It wasn't just divided into white, Black, or Latino. They divided white people into Southern Europeans, Scandinavians, Anglo-Saxon Protestants, etc. Decided how much the property is valued depends in part on which of these groups is the most common in that neighborhood. And so naturally, Black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods, they were considered the least desirable. And so homes in those neighborhoods were badly undervalued by the federal government beginning in the 1930s. And eventually they stopped doing that, but the effects of that are still being felt today. The fact that a property was assigned a low value in the 1930s, that had an effect on how it was appraised the next time, and that had an effect on how it was appraised the next time. These things don't just get erased when the government's policy changes. So there's a huge discrepancy, as I'm sure you all, there's a huge difference, as I'm sure you all know, between how properties in communities of color are valued compared to how they're valued in white communities. Nowadays, the average Black American's home is worth half of what the average white American's home is worth. And that, to be fair, is not an apples for apples comparison. The average white person, the average Black person do not own identical homes. But there was a study, this was 5 years ago, done by the Brookings Institution, and it was incredible. They found a way to compare equally nice homes in equally nice neighborhoods. They found homes in white neighborhoods and homes in Black neighborhoods that were basically identical. The only difference being that one was in a Black neighborhood and one was in a white neighborhood. So they're comparing homes that are very similar in size, number of bedrooms, what kind of features they have, in neighborhoods that are extremely similar in terms of the features that they have. I have no idea how they found such great matches, but they determined that an equally nice home in a white neighborhood is valued 23% more than an equally nice home in a Black neighborhood. And that means that communities of color miss out on $156 billion in wealth. That's a huge part of the racial wealth gap right there. And so the appraisal industry is considered to be a factor in that. Defenders of the appraisal industry have said that, yes, the average appraiser might value a home in a Black neighborhood lower, but the job of an appraiser isn't to determine how much a home should be worth. It's to determine what a home will actually sell for. And so they say the real problem is racism in the marketplace. The average American will pay more for a home in a white neighborhood than an equally nice home in a Black neighborhood. And so they say you can't blame the appraiser on that. You have to blame buyers on that. And there is some truth to that there is racism in the marketplace. I mean, it is true that the average American will pay more for a home in a white neighborhood than for a home in a community of color. That's just a sad truth. And so, yes, the job of an appraiser is to determine what it will actually sell for. But that doesn't let the appraisal industry off the hook entirely, because we know that appraisers are often getting it wrong. The best evidence of that I have seen comes from a Freddie Mac study that was released in 2021. They looked at instances where homes were appraised around the same time that they were sold, and they looked for instances in which the appraiser undervalued the home compared to how much it actually sold for. And they determined that that was 50% more likely to happen if the home was in a Black neighborhood compared to a white neighborhood. And that was twice as likely to happen if the home was in a Latino neighborhood as opposed to a white neighborhood. So appraisers are not just accurately estimating how much a home will sell for, they're getting it wrong much more often in Black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods, and they're guessing low. And that's not, you can't put that all on the public, that's on the appraisal industry. And so let's take a look at the appraisal industry and see why appraisers might be more likely to undervalue homes in communities of color. Appraisers are 97.7% white. They are the whitest profession in America. They're also 70% male, and about half of them, I believe, are over 55. I recently heard someone describe the appraisal industry as pale, male, and stale, and that's pretty much dead on. It's just not a diverse industry. And if you're wondering how an industry can remain that white in America in 2023, well, a big part of it is that in most cases, the only way for people to become licensed appraisers has been to convince a currently licensed appraiser to take them on as an apprentice. And so that was the only way in the door, was to find somebody who's already licensed who will train you. And there's really no incentive for a licensed appraiser to train someone. In order to train someone to get them licensed, you have to share your profits with them while you train them, 50-50. And you have to give them a lot of training. It's a lot of hours. This is not something you would do for a stranger in the vast majority of circumstances. This is something you would only do for a member of your family, or maybe your good friend's kid, something like that. People generally do not go out of their way to share their profits with people they don't have a close connection to. And so with the industry being as white as it is, that made it extraordinarily difficult for people of color to get their feet in the door. There is also a requirement that in order to become a licensed appraiser, or to become a certified appraiser, you need to have a certain number of college credits. And they don't need to be college credits in anything appraisal or real estate related. They could be, English lit credits. And no one has ever been able to provide a good explanation for why you should need college credits to become an appraiser. It's just something that exists because it does. And that also has had a disproportionate effect on people of color who are less likely to have gone to college. And so you have this appraisal industry where there are very few people of color, and homeowners and communities of color have been saying for years that their homes have been undervalued. And there hasn't been a whole lot done about it until recently. Recently, there have been some cases about appraisal bias that made it into the news and all over social media. What happened in these cases were that Black homeowners got their homes appraised, and they met with the appraisers when the appraisers did the home inspection, and they were shocked at how low their homes were valued. And they suspected that racism might be a factor. So they asked a white person they knew to pose as them, and they hired a different appraiser and had their white friend meet the appraiser at their home and pose as the homeowner. And then they found that their homes were worth way more when an appraiser believed that it was a white-owned home. Carlette Duffy in Indianapolis, her home was appraised for $125,000 and $110,000 by two different appraisers. When she asked a white friend to pose as her, the value of the home went up to $259,000, more than a 50% increase, right? So then there's another couple. The Tate Austins in California. This is probably the most famous case. They have a lovely home. They spent a lot of money on it. They spent a fortune renovating it. They were expecting the home to be worth $1.5 million. They met with the appraiser who valued it at less than $1 million. When they asked a white friend to pose as them and brought in a different appraiser, it was valued at almost exactly $1.5 million. So they filed a federal lawsuit, which was recently settled. And so these cases have gotten a lot of attention. And working in fair housing and knowing that appraisal bias is a huge issue, I read a lot about these cases. And I also, I looked at news stories and I looked at the comment sections of these news stories. And, a lot of the comments were awful because so many internet comments are just awful. A lot of people were just, blatantly racist. There were other people who seemed like they weren't necessarily motivated by racism, but their response was, well, this is just one case, this might be an outlier, or Who knows, maybe lots of other people have tried this and didn't get the same results, and we just don't know about it because they didn't file a lawsuit. They said, this one case isn't proof that there is a systemic problem. And so that made me think, well, maybe we should do this on a bigger scale. Maybe we can do some testing, get a bunch of appraisals done, compare how blacks and whites are treated by appraisers, and that will give us more than just anecdotal evidence. So I recruited some interracial couples who own homes in the Baltimore metro area to be our testers. We did 7 different tests in the Baltimore area. For each test, we chose a home that was owned by a black-white interracial couple. And I chose 2 appraisers at random to hire to appraise their homes. And when one appraiser showed up to do the home inspection, only the black partner was there to greet them. And when the other appraiser showed up to do the home inspection, only the white partner was there to greet them. So you have the exact same home being appraised by 2 different people around the same time. Only difference is who is presenting themselves as the owner of the home. One appraiser thinks is going to believe that it's a black-owned home. The other appraiser is going to believe that it's a white-owned home. And so there were 14 appraisals total as part of 7 tests. When the appraiser showed up and met with a white person, we made sure that there was nothing inside the home that would suggest that any black people lived there. We whitewashed the home. We had them take down family photos or any posters posters of black celebrities or African art or anything of that nature. And then when the other appraiser showed up, we made sure that nothing was present in the home that would suggest that any white people lived there. And the results were not terribly surprising. We found that the appraisers who dealt with the white homeowners appraised the homes higher. The average difference was about $7,000. When you compared the appraisers who dealt with the white homeowners and the appraisers who dealt with the black homeowners, the appraisers who dealt with the white homeowners valued the homes almost $7,000 higher on average. What to me was a lot more interesting, though, and a lot more disturbing, was that there were major differences in customer service in terms of how the appraisers treated the homeowners. So I'm going to, basically all of the homeowners who were white got treated very, very well by appraisers. None of them had any complaints about the customer service they received, whereas 2 of the black homeowners received atrocious customer service. So I'm going to walk you through some of the lowlights of what happened over the course of our study. So in one test, the appraiser, in the very first test we did, the appraiser met with a black homeowner, and the value of the home was $310,000. The appraiser who dealt with the white homeowner valued it at $350,000. And then we happened to use this same house for another test, and those 2 appraisers valued at $370,000 and $380,000. So that was a bit suspicious. That made that $310,000 valuation seem suspicious. So we retested that appraiser, and we hired that appraiser to work with a white person. And the appraiser valued that white person's home at $553,000. This home was appraised 5 other times, and none of those appraisers thought it was worth more than $510,000. So basically, this appraiser undervalued a home when a white person presented it, and overvalued they undervalued the home when a black person presented it, and then they overvalued a different home when a white person presented it. Those were the 2 biggest differences in price that we saw throughout the course of the study. In another case, let's call this appraiser B. We hired him to appraise a home. He agreed to it. He showed up, met with a black homeowner, and then ghosted him. We did not hear from him. He did not want the assignment after he met with a black homeowner. He never asked for payment. He never produced a report. No explanation. We tried to hire him again to see if he would do the same thing to a white person. But this home we approached him about appraising, it was in a black neighborhood, and he decided he didn't want that assignment. Do we know for sure that this was based on race, and we can't prove anything, but nothing like this ever happened to any white people, right? And then appraiser C, we hired him to appraise a home that was shown by a Black homeowner. So he met with the Black homeowner, and then we thought he had ghosted. We thought we were ghosted again. This appraiser did not turn in a report, and we did not hear anything back from him. And he did not even respond to a phone call asking, when will this be ready? So we figured it was another case of an appraiser ghosting us. Then after 11 weeks, he produces an appraisal report. No explanation for why it took that long. And I should mention that 2 weeks is a long time to wait for an appraisal report. He made this Black homeowner wait 11 weeks. So we hired the same appraiser to appraise a home presented by a white person. And that time he showed up for the home inspection. And then a week later, he reached out to the homeowner to say, I am so sorry, we don't have the report ready for you. And then it only took 2.5 weeks for this appraiser to produce a report for a white person compared to 11 weeks for a Black person. A huge difference there. And so we ended up filing complaints with the Department of Housing and Urban Development against appraiser A and appraiser C. That's the case with the difference in valuation and the case with the huge difference in waiting times. And our goal is to send a message to appraisers that they can be held accountable for biased appraisals. In the Tate Austin case I was telling you about in California, where the home was worth 1.5 million when a white person presented it and 1 million when a Black person presented it, the appraisal company tried to argue that the Fair Housing Act didn't apply to them. And so the Department of Justice had to actually step in and say, yes, the Fair Housing Act clearly applies to appraisals. It says so in the Fair Housing Act. But I mean, that's how little education there is around this, that there are appraisers who believe that the Fair Housing Act doesn't apply to them. So our goal is to send a message that the Fair Housing Act does indeed apply to appraisals, and you can be held accountable if your appraisal report is biased. So I think I'm at time. There's a lot more I could say about this.
Thank you so much, Jake. Wow. I like to watch in gallery mode when you all are presenting, because I get to see the reactions and the faces of people as you're talking about some of the data and how alarming it really is. Let me start off with just saying thank you and appreciate your boldness in not just, I think many of us heard these cases on the news, right? And for developing this methodology, right? To begin to think about, how do we do this? How do we test the appraisal market? So thank you for having that feeling and for moving on that and really digging into the data, and for the team at NCRC to really work to develop that methodology. I think it goes without saying that it's a real value to the work. And thank you for your presentation of the report. So again, many of us have seen this. How do we fix this, I think, is what people are asking. And what sort of things in the appraisal industry need to be improved? You talked about recruitment, you talked about college credits, but what should we be thinking about in terms of the industry that needs to be improved?
I think we've heard about HMDA, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which requires mortgage lenders, or at least some mortgage lenders, to report the racial data about who they're lending to. It would be amazing to have a similar requirement for appraisers, to have to disclose the races of who they worked with and how their homes were valued, and also which assignments they turned down, what race were those homeowners, that kind of thing. That would be the from that would be incredibly helpful. The industry is very opaque. It's been, up until those studies came out within the past 5 years, we knew very little about what was going on. And so I would love to see appraisal reporting requirements on a federal level.
That's great. And I know the report talks a lot more about some of the recommendations and things moving forward. In my past life, I used to be a testing coordinator. So of course, never did appraisal testing, but I had a question for you about the methodology. Were there any limitations, you talked about a little bit with the data in developing a methodology?
Yeah. One thing that we would do differently if we were to redo the study is to ensure that the that the two homeowners who the appraisers dealt with were the same gender. In this case, in some cases you had a Black woman showing a home to one appraiser and then her white husband showing a home to the other appraiser. And so it's, the discrimination could be based on race or it could be based on gender. It was, we didn't have so many interracial homeowning couples that we could choose from that we could control for that. But but the ideal way to test would be to have two people of the same gender dealing with the different appraisers.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't thought about that just yet. That's a good point. I guess the other question I think people might want to know about is what can community-based organizations, for housing organizations do to sort of engage in this kind of research and documentation, and sort of in light of what does potential redress or action look like? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, for one thing that organizations can do is test. HUD is now giving grants. They're giving testing grants specifically for appraisal testing. If anyone is interested in pursuing that, please reach out to me. I am going to put my personal email address in the chat. I'm not putting my work email address because I am actually leaving NCRC in a few weeks. I'm taking a job at the Department of Justice. So this email address won't be good for very long, but I put my personal email address there. If anyone wants to do testing, please reach out to me. I am happy to I'm happy to help you however I can. And if anyone knows of any instances of appraisal discrimination and they would like to see them investigated, my organization would be happy to do it. So please, you can reach out to me, and I can, if I'm not here anymore, I can reach out to the appropriate co-workers because we are always looking and always interested in investigating these kinds of things.
Thanks so much, Jake, and congratulations. And DOJ seems to be smart. First Tracy, and now you. And I am excited to see you in those spaces and the real impact that you're making. So thank you so much, Jake, for that presentation and for that thoughtfulness.
Oh, thank you.